In 1985, the most creative mind in Silicon Valley was escorted out of his own building, his badge deactivated, his office emptied. The company he built had just fired him. His name was Steve Jobs, and what happened next is the greatest betrayal and comeback story in the history of business. But to understand the betrayal, you first have to understand where he came from. Because Steve Jobs didn't start with everything, he started with nothing. 1955, a young unmarried graduate student named Joanne Schiebel became pregnant. Her conservative father disapproved of the relationship. She had one choice: give the baby up for adoption. On February 24, 1955, a baby boy was born in San Francisco. He was handed to Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple from Mountain View, California. Paul Jobs was a machinist, a man who worked with his hands, a man who fixed things. And every evening, he would take his young son into the garage. He would point to a workbench and he would say, "Steve, this is my workbench. One day, half of it will be yours." That garage would change the world. But young Steve Jobs didn't know that yet. What he knew was that he was different. He was restless in school, bored, constantly challenging teachers. One teacher later said, "Either you put him in a program that stimulates him, or he will simply self-destruct." By the time Jobs was a teenager, he had found his stimulation: electronics. He would cold call engineers at companies like Hewlett-Packard just to ask questions. One of those calls led to a summer job at HP. It was there that he met a lanky, quiet engineering genius named Steve Wozniak. The two became inseparable. Wozniak could build anything. Jobs could sell anything. Together, they were unstoppable. 1976. Steve Jobs was 21 years old. The same garage where his father had taught him to work with his hands became the birthplace of a revolution: Apple Computer. Founded with 3 people, $12,000, and an obsession. Jobs believed computers didn't have to be for scientists and corporations. He believed ordinary people deserved to hold the future in their hands. By 1980, Apple went public. In a single day, it created more millionaires than any company in history up to that point. Steve Jobs, the adopted kid from the working-class garage, was worth $256 million. He was 25 years old. The world called him a genius, a visionary, the future of American business. Nobody was watching the knife being sharpened behind him. By 1983, Apple was struggling. The Apple III had failed spectacularly, overheating so badly that engineers told users to physically lift the computer and drop it to reseat the chips. The Lisa computer, Jobs' personal passion project, had launched at $10,000. It sold so poorly that thousands of unsold units were eventually buried in a Utah landfill. Wall Street was getting nervous. The board was getting restless. And Steve Jobs, brilliant, obsessive, sometimes cruel, was becoming impossible to manage. So Jobs did something that would ultimately destroy him. He decided Apple needed a professional CEO. He flew to New York, sat across from John Sculley, the president of PepsiCo, one of the most admired executives in America. And Jobs looked him in the eyes and said the most famous line in Silicon Valley history: "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley resigned from PepsiCo the next day. Jobs handed him the keys to Apple. And within 2 years, Sculley used those keys to lock Jobs out. 1985. The Macintosh had launched to global fanfare, but sales had disappointed. Jobs was burning through cash, developing new products the board hadn't approved. He was dismissive of colleagues, unpredictable, terrifying to work for. The board had been looking for a reason. Scully gave them one. In a secret board meeting held without Jobs present, Scully proposed stripping Steve Jobs of all operational responsibilities. No team, no products, no power. The vote passed. Jobs still had his title, he still had his corner office, but inside Apple, he was already dead. When Jobs found out, he didn't cry, he didn't beg, he fought back. He secretly began recruiting a small team of loyal Apple employees, planning to leave and start a new company. He even attempted to organize a management coup to remove Scully before Scully could remove him. It failed. When the board discovered his plan, the last door closed. On September 17, 1985, Steve Jobs officially resigned from Apple Computer. He was 30 years old. He walked out of the building carrying almost nothing. A close friend said Jobs cried for days. The man who had stood before the world and promised to put a dent in the universe had just been erased from the only universe he cared about. What happened next is the part most people don't know, because they assume the story ends there. It didn't. Jobs founded Next Computer, determined to build the most powerful workstation ever made. Wall Street laughed. Former colleagues whispered, "Apple's reject, the fallen boy king," a cautionary tale. But Jobs worked in silence. And then, quietly, almost without anyone noticing, he bought a small computer graphics division from filmmaker George Lucas. Lucas needed cash. The division was hemorrhaging money. Nobody in Hollywood wanted it. Jobs paid $5 million. He believed in what the small team of engineers was trying to do. He renamed the company. He called it Pixar. For years, Pixar struggled. Jobs poured tens of millions of his own money into it. At one point, he had invested $50 million, and the company still hadn't turned a profit. His advisors told him to sell it. His accountants told him to close it. Jobs refused, because he saw something nobody else saw. He saw the future of storytelling. In 1995, Pixar released a small animated film called Toy Story. The world had never seen anything like it. It became the highest-grossing film of 1995. When Pixar went public, on the very same week Toy Story was released, Steve Jobs' $50 million bet became $1.2 billion in a single day. The man Apple had thrown away had just become a billionaire, not from Apple, from a company nobody wanted. But while Jobs was rising in the shadows, Apple was dying in the spotlight. After Jobs left, the board gave Scully free rein. He launched product after product that failed. The Newton personal digital assistant, mocked globally for its broken handwriting recognition. The Pippin gaming console, outsold by every competitor. The Performa home computer line, a confusing mess of models nobody understood. By 1996, Apple's market share had collapsed from 16% to less than 4%. They were burning through cash. Engineers were leaving for competitors. The press wrote Apple's obituary. Businessweek ran a cover story asking a question that once would have been unthinkable: the fall of an American icon. The board panicked. They fired Scully, then fired his replacement, then fired his replacement's replacement. 3 CEOs in 4 years. And then they made the call they had been dreading for a decade. They called Steve Jobs. Not to give him a second chance, because they had no other choice. In December 1996, Apple acquired Next Computer for $427 million, and with it, Steve Jobs walked back through the doors he'd been thrown out of 11 years earlier. The same hallways, The same atrium, different everything else. Jobs sat in front of the board, surveyed the damage, and said words that became legend. "The products are shit. We need to fix that." He wasn't wrong. What followed was one of the most ruthless corporate transformations in American history. Jobs cut Apple's product line from 350 items to 10. He called product meetings and pointed at the whiteboard. "Which of these products would I recommend to my friends?" If the answer was no, the product was canceled immediately. He fired entire divisions. He walked past engineers in the hallway and told them their projects were garbage directly to their faces. He recruited Johnny Ive, a quiet British designer who had been ignored under the previous regime. Together, they began designing something that had never existed before. A computer that wasn't just a machine, a computer that was beautiful. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac. Translucent blue, rounded curves, a screen and computer combined into one seamless object. It looked like it had come from the future. It sold 800,000 units in its first 139 days. Apple posted its first profit in years. The resurrection had begun. What came after changed everything. 2001, the iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. 2003, iTunes, the music industry would never be the same. 2007, the iPhone. Jobs stood on a stage and said he was introducing 3 products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. The crowd laughed, thinking he was describing 3 separate products. Then he smiled. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. The iPhone sold 6 million units in its first year. It created an entirely new industry. Every smartphone you see today, every app, every swipe, every tap, exists because Steve Jobs refused to disappear. By 2010, Apple had surpassed Microsoft as the most valuable technology company on Earth. By 2011, it had surpassed ExxonMobil as the most valuable company of any kind on Earth. The same company that had deactivated his badge, the same company that had emptied his office, the same company that had voted to take everything from him, was now, because of him, worth more than any company in history. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs died at his home in Palo Alto, California. He was 56 years old. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in 2003, fought quietly for 8 years. The night he died, people gathered outside Apple stores around the world.
Not because the CEO had passed away, but because something that felt irreplaceable was gone. Tim Cook, his successor, sent a message to Apple employees. Steve's passing is a loss felt around the world. Apple has lost a visionary and creative genius. Millions of people who had never met him felt it personally, because they had met him through every device he had ever made. Every time they unlocked their phone, opened a laptop, watched a Pixar film, they had been, without knowing it, touching the work of a man who had been told he was finished at 30 years old. Here is what this story actually teaches us. Not believe in yourself, not never give up. Every motivational poster says that. Here is the real lesson. The people who betrayed Steve Jobs thought they were removing a problem. They were actually building his legend. Because the betrayal forced Jobs out of Apple before he was ready. And that forced exile, those 11 years of wilderness, forged him into something that the younger, arrogant Jobs never was. At Next, he learned discipline. At Pixar, he learned patience. In defeat, he learned which battles were worth fighting and which weren't. The Jobs who returned to Apple in 1997 was not the same man they had fired in 1985. He was sharper, calmer, more focused. The betrayal didn't break him, it completed him. John Scully, the man who handed the board the knife, spent the rest of his career being introduced as one thing and one thing only: the man who fired Steve Jobs. That is his legacy. Not the Newton, not the Pippin. That one decision, that one betrayal, that is what history remembers him for. And Steve Jobs? He's why you're holding a smartphone right now. He's why the movies your children watch look the way they do. He's why a computer sitting on your lap is thinner than a magazine. He was thrown out, he came back, and he changed everything. I didn't see it then, but getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. Steve Jobs, Stanford University Commencement Address, June 12, 2005.